Hello, everyone. I'm Kalyan Balakrishnan with the IT Service Management Forum in San Francisco Bay Area. Today, we'll be talking to someone who has an extensive experience with IT service management and played a number of roles within the IT service management area. He's been an IT service management consultant. He's been an architect in ITSM and worked on a number of domains, including healthcare, insurance, and finance sector. Hi, Steve. Welcome to our program.
Hi, Kalyan. Thank you.
Yeah. So please provide some background about your ITSM experience and your experience with the ITSM and its various processes.
Sure. I've spent the last 20 plus years working in a variety of different slots in organizations and doing a variety of different processes and working with companies to solve problems. I've also worked closely with itSMF as a LIG member, and then starting a LIG, and then going ahead, or actually taking over a LIG, and then becoming the president and working through that cycle. And then participated at some meetings with ITSMF USA in terms of determining their strategic direction over the past couple of years. More recently, I've been doing some research on service management. It's taken a little bit longer than I expected, but I think I'm pretty well done with it. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the culmination of the type of thing that I would like to see done every organization do themselves, is to pay attention to what is actually going on in the organization and use their metrics and the information that they have inside the organizations to improve their ITSM capabilities. There's a number of areas that I've implemented. I've gone through many of the processes, not all of them, but the fundamental ones: change in incident management, problem management, as well as some of the more interesting ones like asset management, which is not an ITIL process, but definitely related through via SACM, and/or configuration management, whichever term you prefer, and then configuration management, which is kind of the epitome of all of those.
Mm. Now, so obviously, you have played various roles. You're also, just you mentioned, you're doing some research on it, and you've been involved in it for quite some time. Why do you think IT service management is an important field?
If done right, it can provide visibility into an IT organization for the CIO and everyone in the IT organization, as well as the customers, so that they can understand what's going on in their IT organization and to learn about it and improve it over time. Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned that one thing that that's a point to note is you have been a LIG, ITSMF LIG president, past president of the San Francisco Bay LIG. So there are ITSM forums, and we hear a lot about ITIL framework, which is guidelines, and then you've also been involved with COBIT. You have lots of experience on that. Do you think that with all of these frameworks and all of the various forums and other things, that IT service management has attained a level of maturity? Because one side is the process, other side is the technology, and the tools are coming up. So do you think, with regards to the maturity of IT service management, do you think we have attained, or do you think we have a long way to go
there? Very hard question. Good question. I think there's multiple components to it. One is the technology, and the technology keeps redefining itself. And with that, there's a gap in terminology that comes up quite frequently. There's also a belief in some cases, which goes to the second portion, which is people, that process is either not important or process already exists inside the tools. And I had that restated to me a couple of times over the years, that the tools provide the process. And the appalling lack of awareness of what process really is and does surprises me in many organizations, and especially at leadership levels. So it makes it hard for service management as a collection of activities, processes, and tools and activities to work together and actually produce value in a meaningful way. So what I see often are fairly reactionary implementations of incident management, which by its nature it is, and change management, which should be a little more proactive, but oftentimes it's not because we don't have the visibility into the infrastructure that we need. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question, I think that the guidelines are mature. I think there's always going to be things that will be added to them over time, such as new things that come up. Cloud technology is obviously adding new topics for its consideration. The way that the world works in terms of things like DevOps as a way of doing things, and the integration with a variety of different methodologies that are out there, and the new ideas that are coming up around service management, some of which attempt to redefine service management in a different way. They all are trying to do similar things, but there's not a cohesive, ball of activity around something that is well-defined and by tool vendors and by the people who carry out the process as an entity called service management. And because of that confusion, I don't know that it's going to be simple to unthread that and figure out what it really is. So to answer your question, I'd say no, it's not.
Okay. Now,
as a practice.
Okay. So you look at I2, right? The guidelines and the framework, it provides 26 processes, right? In your experience, I don't think there are any organization that has actually implemented all 26 processes, and it is also not, based on what we read, it is also not, recommended that they go and just blindly implement all those 26 processes. So in your experience, what do you think are the most important, and how do you go about defining what processes to implement, number one, and number two, what do you think are the most important processes out of all this? And again, I'll say it with ITSM is important and all processes would be important, but generally, what do you think are the most important ones to, or at least the first ones to start implementing?
Yeah, so I think obviously incident is critical to be able to get a hold of what's going on, and the corollary change, which allows the changes that go into the organization, which leads to incidents occurring because things change. Those two processes kind of go hand in hand, and I think those need to be in initially without any question. The next could possibly be problem management, but problem management has this inherent trouble about it, and that is that it needs to understand the infrastructure in order to be able to be really effective in understanding the causes of incidents. And change has a similar issue, and so does incident management. They all need to understand the infrastructure. And unfortunately, we really don't get very far with that. We need to understand how things are connected together to deliver services. That's the point. And in most organizations today, we don't have a clue. In fact, many organizations don't even know where their assets are. So in order to be able to have a fairly grounded organization, I think you need to have asset management. I think you need to have some level of configuration management to show the connectedness between items. And on top of that, you need to have an effective monitoring system that provides event management to give you a heads up on incidents that are going on. And it needs to do that across the technology stack, but also it needs to be able to do it vertically to identify disruptions in those connections, in those services, so that you'll be able to get the alerts when those happen. If you could do that, you would have the foundation of an excellent service management organization, because you'd have the insight you needed to implement other processes, the foundational layers. I think that configuration management and asset management have always been seen as ladder activities or something they don't care about or something that's not important. I've seen people look around for days, literally, trying to figure out what caused an incident, and it's like a step one or priority one. And they have to figure out what caused the incident. It may be some router flapping, because it had bad code in it, which actually was an instance. that was upgraded without somebody knowing about it, and the flapping seemed to be kind of random, but it was all the same incident over a period of 3 days. So when those kinds of things happen, they really call out for some discipline in the organization to understand what's going on, and for people to come together and figure out how to put these things in place so that they have a good, intelligent approach to how they manage their services and how they collect data and how that data works together to lead them and give them the clues they need in rapid time, in a very, very foreshortened time frame. So it doesn't take days or even hours or even minutes to find out what failed and how to go replace it. On the back end, once you find it, it may take longer to replace it, but finding it, there's no excuse for not knowing where it is.
Yeah.
Same thing when we put something into the organization, understanding what we are putting into the organization, what it potentially can break is critical.
Yeah. See, you touched upon a very important point here, Steve, because, incident, change, to some extent problem, these are the low-hanging fruits and they are important, right? Service disruption, we want to minimize the service disruption. And we want to, get the service back if it is disrupted quickly. So incident management, change management is important. But the thread that ties all of them is configuration. Like you said, you really need to know what your infrastructure is in order for us to really identify, why this incident is happening. You need to really the bottom line, the basic block is the configuration. It's a server or database or whatever. Two things here. We keep talking about CMDB, right? And why you also mentioned that it is it's not happening, but why? Because there's one end, we have to build a good CMDB, and the tools, there are lots of tools today that are coming up with automatic discovery. So things can be automated much more, and it can be discovered quickly. So you really, on one hand, you think that you really don't need to spend a lot of time in trying to build, what are your assets and what are your, the building blocks of your IT service. But then we also hear that, building a CMDB is very complex and takes more time. So why do you think that is still not, fully achieved?
Since I did it 15 years ago in a more limited form, but I did it through a bunch of manual activities, but we also had the automation there. It was necessary to keep the CI relationships up to date. It wasn't hard. It was people thinking about it, understanding what the problem was, approaching it, and then hitting the nail on the head when we did it. And it wasn't cheap. People had to commit, and it was a 3-year project. So that's, I think, what most organizations aren't willing to do. And it's a technology and discipline problem too, in terms of the organization itself. Having the discipline to make sure that the information is updated in whatever you want to put it in. Notice that we talk about the CMDB all the time. Everybody talks about the CMDB. We hear that word everywhere. But we never hear the word configuration management, which is the process that manages it, along with asset management, which maintains everything that underpins that. Without those two processes in place, you don't have anything meaningful in your CMDB, and you can't have it. Otherwise, you've got asset management, quote unquote, by discovery. Somebody made that term up a long time ago, but I think it's what happens today. So asset management by discovery, running your discovery tool and discovering the world is not an answer. There still needs to be manual intervention on those assets that are discovered to go ahead and enter manual information in the CMDB about them, put eyes on it, and make sure that you understand that it really is the asset that it purports to be, and it's not something that somebody snuck in there to look like that. One of the things that service management needs to pay attention to, I don't mean to change tracks here, I just want to touch on this point, is that cybersecurity has become a big issue. I've spent the last year, and also part of other incident or other contracts, working on directly on, as this last year was, or as an adjunct to cybersecurity efforts. So cybersecurity is really a big problem in our organization, simply because we can't track our own assets. And cybersecurity has unusual requirements for that. They want you to track everything and who has it and when they have it, and so forth. That's very difficult on its own. And so that makes asset management paramount to being in an IT organization today. And it means managing and handling user assets, end user assets, which normally isn't part of configuration management. And since that's changed the landscape, I don't know that the picture in IT has changed. I don't think that this is indoctrinated into the IT organizations or particularly well into IT service management. I know that there's some efforts like Brasilia and so forth that are going on along those lines. They don't really address the NIST framework in the way that the NIST framework can be easily addressed because COBIT's in the middle of it. COBIT has all the requirements we need. Mm. And so, and that along with ISO 27002, and one, pretty much have all the requirements for what you need inside of there. If you took those two, you took the typical service management organization and took the NIST requirements, combined them together into a single set of requirements for an IT service management organization, and then collaborated with the security group to be able to identify what a security incident is, have that language in your organization, be able to set up the processes to hand back and forth during your incident management process, because incident management can be one process, at least from the detection point of view.
Yeah.
And obviously it gets handed off after that, it gets triaged. But the idea that organizations work together to do that sort of thing is new. And I'm glad to see that ITSMF in San Francisco is pulling that meeting together. I'm quite excited about it, that we're meeting with security folks from other organizations to go ahead and discuss possibly the future. I see a real powerful future between the two, and perhaps service management organizations and can leverage the capabilities that they have in asset management and configuration management to work with cybersecurity and make both disciplines more powerful. The current lay of the land is that in many organizations, security simply goes around IT service management because they can't get them to do what they need, so they have to build up their own tool set to discover and figure out what's out there. And they need to do it in a much more detailed and different way than we do. I've worked with security professionals, so I understand what their needs are for cybersecurity. And it's an entirely different set of things. But to go back to the point, to lay the groundwork for asset management there are asset management organizations that do have standards. Mm-hmm. And we should be liaisoning with them, and I'm doing that kind of in the back. I'm not kind of in the background, but in the background. And then we should also be understanding what configuration management really means, which goes to the point of how do you define a service? An IT service to me simply is a connected set of components, IT components, that provide a service, deliver data to a customer. So, excuse me. So it's very simple. And if you don't think about it if you think about it as something other than that, it's like when you go turn in a request for to get access to an email account. That's not a service. That's a request.
Yes.
So the requests and services have been confused and conflated, if you will, by tool vendors, because the service catalog isn't really a service catalog. It's more a request catalog, and mm-hmm. The language is confused, and it's confused in a lot of places, like what's a CI and stuff like that. That all gets in our way, and it confuses us, and we think we're talking the same language. Well, we're not. The idea behind all of this is that there should be a call out for technology companies to, not worry about differentiating themselves so much in terms of the language that they use with respect to ITIL. That's kind of how it evolved. Is they came up with an idea about service catalogs because they needed to have that capability in organizations, and was seen as a storefront at that time, and that made a lot of sense. But then there's this other, ITIL-born service catalog, which is really quite different. And marrying the two together, which is what some organizations have tried to do by developing their own, or having a service portfolio off to the side and using that as part, part portfolio and part catalog, ITIL service catalog. have been kind of proxies for all of this. and that's just a major issue around the language. But if we can figure out what an IT service is and call it that, and actually go through an organization, define what those services are that you actually deliver, nail them down to what the implementation of them looks like inside of a CMDB, and then go ahead and build the models for the primary services that you really want to watch, your critical business services, then you have a chance. At least you can, model those services in there with real CIs and keep them up to date. The other thing about asset management by discovery is that you have a discovery process, which is writing in your production CMDB, which is the inverse of what you really want to happen if you're going to do configuration management. The CMDB is supposed to be the container of the registered and approved devices that are to be on your network. And in fact, what happens is it's a collection of discovered stuff and stuff that people put in there. So you don't know what it is. So you need to have good controls. And right now, the technologies that are out there, at least one of them, primary one, doesn't have those controls. So that's an issue. And that's why doing configuration management there is a little on the difficult side.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that. Does that answer your question?
Great insight, Steve. I mean, I think you kind of nailed it and, explained, everything, what is the problem and what we should do and why it's critical. The last thing that I wanted to ask you is, you mentioned that you are doing some research in the ITSM area. If you can, just a high level stuff, what is the area of interest and what are you working on? Just high level.
Sure. It started off as doing a survey, getting some ideas about what people were interested in service management. And ITSMF sponsored this, and I was really grateful that they did, to put together a questionnaire, distribute the questionnaire, and collect the information on, specifically the questions were, how do you measure IT service value, which is a major question. And the other one was, how do you, what is the relationship between organizational change management and IT service management? And both of those are, both have very strong, powerful effects on how we do things. So if you think about value, if we talk about value in an organization, it's kind of a word we use loosely, and we don't tie it to much. Well, value can be measured in some pretty concrete ways. And they all depend on your customer and what your customer thinks is valuable to them. That's how you retain your customers, by giving them that feedback that, yeah, I did that, and them seeing that, yeah, you did that. And that's that part of it. And then the other part of it is organizational change management is about things that get in the way. That it's the human component really kind of getting in the way of implementing things. And they do that for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes people are resistant to change. That seems to be one of the primary things. But there's also other sorts of barriers around them. They may be, the culture of the organization. They may be just some formal barriers like some IT requirements, or there's some federal requirements or something along those lines that prevents them from being able to implement what they want. The other parts of that are manyfold, but basically what we did was try to crystallize what some major buckets were in terms of organizational change management, and then then we wanted to ask also what benefits were people seeing from service management, and that had to do with a number of processes implemented, what processes they had implemented, as well as how they fared with some of these challenges that they had. And it started off as just a simple survey, but it got into more inferential statistics, which is basically saying, if I see these things, then I can kind of predict what will be the outcome in the future of some of these other things. So it's turned out to be a little more interesting than your average write-up that basically condenses what a survey did.
Okay. Excellent. So thanks, Steve. Thanks for your time today, and you really shared This is all, this is what is, the IT Service Management Forum is all about. As you know, you've been a president.
Yeah,
Your knowledge and really insightful information based on your experience and why our ITSM field is critical, and what are the important aspects of it. So once again, I'd like to thank you from itSMF LIG, and we'll talk soon. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.